his comparison of the Darius tablets has some serious errors. The first one he doesn't understand is there's not 60 words on there. There, it's in three different languages. You've got the wrong script. You're comparing the wrong type of script. You don't understand the source material. And then it's also, you have to modify it to the character density, the glyph density that's on the characters document, right? So if you look at the Darius plate, well, those are spaced, those are pretty widely. So you could, it's pretty obvious. You could probably get that on a smaller, write that a little smaller if you wanted.
So Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores church history and the church's truth claims.
Okay, I'm just going to quote. So this come from LDS discussion. So I think we've kind of addressed this, but I want to just represent. This is what he has to say. So he's suggesting the
I don't know who this guy. I don't know who this guy is, but that's okay.
His name. Well, I don't know his actual name. He's doing a series with John on Mormon stories. So he has a website called LDS Discussions.
Well, and here's all I can say is, like, when I do research, nothing against podcasters, but it's more of an entertainment. If you'll notice, this new stuff will all also publish in a book, but I think it doesn't do any good for these people to come on and just blab out stuff. They need to produce a document, a book, a paper that can be academically reviewed, and it can see all their sources and all this stuff. Because I think it's a curse of podcasts, as people come on and just say crap.
It's the importance of
and they don't, and they're not thorough. I mean, they're not looking at all the opposing points of view and evaluating it and doing sophisticated analysis. It's just they have their echo chamber audience that they're playing to, which Mormon LDS has, do, and so they're just saying things that the people want to hear often. And so sometimes, I'm not saying that the critiques aren't okay and you can ask those questions, but it's useful if they're saying something, produce something that's, a paper or something that I could actually look through and see whether your sources are in that. So anyway, that's just my soapbox.
Yeah. So I just want you to address this. So I think there's a lot of baked in assumptions, because I remember first hearing this a couple of years ago and wasn't aware of your work, hadn't interviewed Neil. So this was sort of like, oh, I don't know, whenever I first encountered this. So it was a bit of like a shelf item. But in his math, so he's suggesting the unsealed portion is 12 plates. Now, he doesn't explain where he's getting the 12 plates from, but what I think he must have done is he's assuming the 24 jaredite plates is the 2/3 of the total plates. So 2/3 is 24, 1/3 would be 12. So he's saying so that the Book of Mormon comes from 12 plates. And then I'll just read what he says. He said, the unsealed portion that made up the plates used for translation probably consisted of 12 plates. The first edition of the Book of Mormon is 588 pages. This means that a single plate corresponds to 50 pages of English text. Each plate then would correspond to 22,000 words. And I double checked his math. I think he is right. It's 22,500 if you would have it fit on 12 plates. And then he argues the logic of Joseph's time was that the characters were dense and a single character represented like 20 or 30 words. So he's saying that's why Joseph at the time thought that 12 plates could fit, the whole text of the Book of Mormon, because one character represent 20 or 30 words. And he's basically saying how this is just basically absurd and ridiculous. What would be your response to this in light of your research?
I do think that really is absurd and ridiculous, what he's done. His analysis is, it's absurd. Number one, like I said at the beginning, you have to figure out, based on something that's more than just making up, the number of plates, right? So what have I done? I've gone through all this, measured pasteboard and look at the descriptions, tested the flexibility that was described, and arrived at a thickness of the plates, which then gives you a sophisticated calculation of the number of plates. That's why if you're assuming 12 plates, well, all of your math was wasted.
I guess he's assuming
it's based on the wrong
sealed portion is 24 individual plates, and that's what the 24 jared plates are, not including the record jared.
And I'm just telling you that even if you're assuming a third, I have 300 to 600 for the full stack. Even if you assume that it's a third, well, you're still looking at 100 to 200 plates that are covering the Book of Mormon. Even if you said there's this, we're because I'm just evaluating the description of the plates that were able to be moved around.
Right, because if it was 12 plates, so let's say taking his math, sorry,
I mean, if
math needs to be 36 plates in 6 inches. So if you divide 6 inches, like the height of the plates, by 36,
yeah,
the plates each plate wouldn't have been pliable then, like paper. Going with his
24
math.
plates. No, you couldn't even. They'd probably cut your finger if you tried to open them. Honestly,
Right.
I mean, it's saying they're like sharp edged, hard, thick things. So that's what I'm saying is you can make up whatever you want if you make an assumption of a number of plates that you think from whatever. It's like, no, I'm taking the actual descriptions that were given of the plates and the thickness, right? Paperboard isn't, you're not going to get paperboard or even tin of that size, really. Common tin, that'd be very thick tin to have 12 plates in 3 inches. Like, it's not even a plate, it's a hunk, it's an ingot. And so what I'm saying is you have to look at the description given, right, by the people that handled the plates or had the plates, which I've done. Then I've scientifically determined the thickness based on the parameters that they could flip through them, and they rustled and parchment. So I'm taking them at their word, and then calculated the thickness that you get. And then if you use that thickness, everything works fine. That's all I'm saying. I'm not like back calculating. I'm not just, they're just, to take that number, you're just kind of taken out of your arse, to be honest with you. It's like, oh, the 24 plates and they're in the sealed portion and that's a portion. It's like, well, you don't even understand what the 24 plates are. You don't look at the sophistication. It says there was an interpreted version of the Brother Jared in there, and he's working off an interpreted version. He's not working off the original plates. He had an interpreted version that he's Moroni's working with, right? So again,
and what's worse, he didn't actually explain where he got the number 12 from. No, that's obviously where he got it from, but there was no explanation for it. And then it was just very emphatic: math destroys the Book of Mormon and the gold plates. And
well, no, all it does is destroy
a lot of assumptions.
It just shows stupidity. That's all. That's all I'm saying. Meaning, if you're following the scientific method, you go through the method. That's what I've done. So I'm not see. Obviously, people take numbers to try to prove something. They've already decided what the end result is. I'm saying, no, I don't know. So let's figure out what the thickness was. Okay, I think I figured it out based on matches all the descriptions at the time. Matches, then I can calculate an alloy mix that matches the weight and the dimensions, which gives you, if you assume Tumbaga, that's like it's somewhere around 8 carat of an alloy. You don't have to assume Tumbaga. Actually, they had gilding, so you could just use copper plate that's gilded. That actually gives you lighter than Tumbaga, to be honest with you, a little bit. So I'm just saying that's what I did. And so how they can criticize it, I don't really know. Nobody really has, to be honest, other than just name calling. Like somebody said, oh, Jerry Grover did this rice paper. This rice paper is like, that was the most idiotic statement I've ever heard. It's like, when that came up, it's like, this guy's not a metallurgist at all. He's not even looked at plates. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. He's just he's decided that he wants to try to prove that the Book of Mormon can't fit. And I'm just saying, whether it fit or not, I didn't care. I was just doing the original calculation of determining the thickness based on the parameters given. That's it.
Because I've heard some.
It ends up as you do the rest of the calculation, it works. I'm just saying, I didn't do that. I didn't assume, oh, I got to figure out a thickness that fits everything on these plates. No, I just did the testing. Whatever it came out as, right? So that's what I'm saying.
Say there's some critics who say that, oh, well, there's no way, like if you get below like a millimeter in thickness or like half a millimeter in thickness for each plate, that's just way too thin. There's no way you could engrave on both sides. But I guess I
just showed you I could.
It.
Yeah, I just showed you I did it. No sweat. I could probably even do thinner. And with an obsidian awl, pre-Columbian obsidian awl, nothing even modern, and with the exact parameters you'd expect for ancient work copper. So there's nothing. It's because you know. So What else do you want? I don't know. I mean, basically that's what I've done. And again, what I find is none of them read my book. So they're
Right.
making all these statements. It's like, oh, you didn't even read the book. So how can you even criticize me? You don't even know what I'm talking about. You don't even know the method. And then somebody says, well, why does he make some plates? Okay, now I've made them. Showed it's really easy to grave on it. So there you go. I don't know what else you want. I
Mm.
don't really care. I don't normally respond to critics. I just do my work. But this one I thought, you know what? I've got a little money of my own. I'll just do it. It'd be fun. So I did
Yeah,
it.
well, that's good. Well, so before we get on to this, to Trent Horn, who's a Catholic apologist who did a debate with Jacob Hansen, I've got one question that I have with regards to the plates, because there's a source. I don't know if you're aware of the Jonathan Hadley account when Joseph was looking, to get the Book of Mormon printed, and he described to Jonathan Hadley like how he got the plates, bit about the description of the plates, the translation. Um, but I looked it up there as we were talking, and let's see, he's quoting Joseph. Most of what's in here I think is fairly accurate, although he's quite obviously dismissive of it. But one question I have is, he said that the plates, or I can't read that word, the something of the Bible were plates of gold. I think it's leaves. Yeah, the leaves of the Bible were plates of gold, about 8 inches long, 6 wide, and 1/8 of an inch thick, which were engraved with characters or hieroglyphics. So, no, my
Yeah,
math
that's
isn't
it. That's the
amazing.
only source that says anything, but it's like there's no evidence that's just guessing. That meaning nobody measured it in the sense
Right,
that Joseph Smith didn't say it. Nobody was saying it was ever measured. This is one secondhand account. I'm like, well, okay.
right.
But
Because I think a critic would say, oh, well,
and
Joseph
if you
would be saying that each plate was about an eighth of an inch thick, which would be
and I'm telling you, if it's an eighth of an inch thick, you can't flip through it like parchment.
right. Okay. And you're saying
That does
it's
not
very
match
unlikely
what
they
the
would have measured it closely to determine, but that was maybe either their guess or estimate, or it's secondhand.
exactly. I
Okay.
mean, you may have had like the lid on the top. I mean, it's talked about there was this lid where the interpreters maybe that was thicker. I don't know. Where that Joseph Smith Sr. talked about it like a lid, and then the interpreter sat under the spectacle sat under the lid. Um,
But you're saying
so,
if it
so
was an eighth of an inch thick, it couldn't have been pliable like paper as it's described by other
impossible.
witnesses.
Yeah, you can't
Okay.
unless you're no, I don't think if you had tried to use pure gold, it would just bend. You couldn't flip through it.
Mm.
So yeah. So what I'm saying is I've used the parameters that seem to be objective by different people that handle the plates as to that they, and again, they said parchment, thick parchment. Parchment's not an eighth of an inch thick. Nobody's writing on an eighth of an inch thick paper. It's not, it's just, that's like getting cardboard, right? Um, William Smith talked about like your Bible. They're called leaves. Okay, so it's kind of even that term seems to be that they're thinner, right? They're not even
Mm.
calling them plates exactly. They're saying leaves. So I'm just saying that all the evidence is, and so yes, that is the one. I guess you could say outlier, but I'm not saying it's an outlier. I think it's just an assumption. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
So if they want to say that, well, okay, then go ahead and produce an eighth inch thick plate that you can rustle through and flip through.
All right.
Right.
Well, let's address, and you can debunk Trent Horn here. He's
Well,
a bit of a back and forth with David Snell of Saints Unscripted.
yeah, I mean, again, it's like this is more or less trying to show if you want to try to do this type of analysis, like can it all fit? There's a couple things. Number one, you need to know your source material, um, but we know it's logographic. Okay, there's certain things that I don't think any person that knows anything about language would say this is the number of unique characters in the character document tell you it's a logographic script. So if you're trying to compare other kinds of script, well, of course, you're always going to get numbers that would make it so it's probably not going to fit. I mean, it depending on what you choose. Um, You also have to be careful about, and then the number of plates. So if you've got a small number of plates, well, okay, it makes it hard to fit, right? So if you're like this guy, so he talks about, and he used the plates of Darius. And here's the first problem. He said there are 60 English words on this big plate, right? Um, and then he assumes the number is 40. His comparison to the Darius tablets has some serious errors. The first one he doesn't understand is there's not 60 words on there. It's in 3 different languages, 3 different scripts, and it's the same thing in 3 different scripts, 60 words. Does that make sense?
So
But it's 3 times.
Words. Oh,
it's not 60, it's 180 words.
Oh, I see. So,
yeah,
it's on there 3 times in 3 different languages. It's 60 words, but if it filled the entire plate, you're saying it would be about 180.
No, words. I'm saying there are 180 on there.
Right.
Yeah, he's just said, oh, well, a third of it, meaning you have Old Persian, you have Akkadian and Elamite. Okay. And it's the same phrase. They just, on the plates of Darius, they just did the same phrase in 3 different languages, a little bit like the Rosetta Stone, right? So he's declaring this thing, and so he's obviously didn't even understand the plate he's working with. He didn't understand there were 3 different languages on there. He didn't understand that it's 60 words for each language. So that plate has
160 words on a third of each.
Yes.
Right.
So I'm like, okay. So why these discussions are so, again, that's the thing is, that's why these podcasters, all this stuff, I don't pay any attention hardly to them, because they obviously they need to produce something that can be reviewed and looked through. And they almost just look like fools is what they do when they get into areas that they don't know what they're talking about. So, and then again, these are not, Old Persian is a syllabary, 36 phonetic characters and 8 logograms. It's not a logographic text. Akkadian is primarily syllabic, as is Elamite. So anyway, so I can go through and do the calculations, which I've done, but you've got the wrong script. You're comparing the wrong type of script. You don't understand the source material. And then it's also, you have to modify it to the character density, the glyph density that's on the characters document, right? So if you look at the Darius plate, well, those are spaced, those are pretty widely. So it's pretty obvious. You could probably get that on a smaller, write that a little smaller if you wanted.
So you're saying it's a different type of script. You're saying it's more like phonetic or a syllable.
They're syllabary. And as I went through before, the alphabetic script tends to take more. You have more glyphs per word.
Right, syllabary, like our language.
Yeah, syllabary you have less, and then logographic you could have just, if it's purely logographic, you could have just one. Now, I'm not saying there's any purely logographic, although, and there's also what's called mnemonic, which is sometimes, and I think to some extent, maybe you have that in the Book of Mormon, is where you can actually have one glyph and it maybe represents a little story or something. They're almost like memory tools for an oral history. They would sometimes have like something that would remind them of something.
But like, would you view the phrase like "and it came to pass"? Like,
yeah, that's one. Like, that's one. Right. So there you have. Not only is there not one per word, you get 6 words in one glyph.
And it could possibly be even a phrase. Okay.
Right. And I'm just saying, we know that in the Book of Mormon. So that's something like 3%, 2.5%, 3% of all the words it came to pass in the Book of Mormon. So what I'm saying is, so not only is it logographic, it's like more than logographic, probably. And I think my translation, that's what it was. It's clearly, it's logographic. It's exactly what you would expect it to be based on the number of unique characters. Now, there's not everyone. So, some names have multiple glyphs, to make up the name. So I'm not saying that it's all one perfect, but it's very logographic. So if you start with that wrong premise by starting to look at plates with not a logographic glyph on it, you're already jeeping it the wrong direction, right?
I
And then
see.
you also need to adjust for, say, okay, at least say, I'm at least saying the characters document looks to be maybe the kind of how the glyphs appeared on the plates, right? The number and size, right? So if you take some plate from somewhere, you know, you have to say what was the book, what will we expect on the Book of Mormon in terms of the number of glyphs per square inch, right? Um,
And where were these plates of Darius? Where were they found? Was it somewhere in Europe or Middle
no,
East?
I was in Iran, Persepolis, is it Persepolis? And they were found in a corner. There was uh, a gold plate and then silver plates, like two gold plates and two silver, I think. And they were in a stone box at the corner of a temple. And they all said this, it said the same thing. And it's kind of ironic. People say, well, why don't we find all these plates everywhere? Even that, somebody got one of the plates and melted it down and sold
Mm,
it. So metal plates, I don't expect them to survive. If somebody finds them, they're not leaving
they're
them there.
precious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gold. Yeah, yeah, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, well, of course, that's why I'm not saying you don't find plates, but it's like of all the record, you would expect those to not survive. Those are to be picked up and recycled or taken or whatever. So, and this is what it says. I'm just saying it's actually 59 words if you count the dash, you know. Um, anyway, that's just what it says that's what that script translates to. So then they use that and then you do the calculations. And I'm just going through this again as an example of what you should, if you're going to take a language and try to get it to compare to the gold plates, these arbitrary things don't make you need to, I don't care if people do it, it's fine, but you need to pick the right type of language. You need to adapt it to the character density that we from the characters document. And then I just threw in, I says, and this is kind of shows you, like I showed, that the old Persian had 190 characters, 3.2 glyphs per word, 150 characters. I actually just threw this into Google Translate and say, here's what you get in Chinese, you know, which is more logographic. Um, and so it's 69 characters. So it's a lot less, right?
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just saying, yeah, you've got to get the right language type. Or of course you can show anything you want if you,
So
and
sort
it's
of
like,
like comparing apples and oranges.
yeah, and so here, what does he do? He picks, you know, Phoenician, this Pyrgi plate, which is dimension, at least in this one, his dimension is right. And the translation number, it actually has, he says 100. I actually counted 88 words. But again, it's alphabetic. And so can you get something? Yeah, but um, I'm not going to go through. I mean, it's just kind of, anyway, I'm just showing you that if you're going to do this type of analysis of word count and see if it can all fit, you at least need to recognize it. We're looking at a very logographic script. So go find something that's logographic, or at least do an adjustment. Say, okay, Chinese has this language has this, so you'd expect, you know, half as many glyphs, something. That's why these are so unsophisticated. It's hard to even take them seriously. And then they just make it some, they can always just fiddle with the number of plates to get what they want. Oh, 12, 24. I'm just saying I've laid out exactly the, you know, my calculations, scientifically looking at the thickness of the plates. It gives you a plate count, looking at my best take on what's in the sealed portion, you know, I mean, and why it's a uniform plate stack and that kind of thing. And so the Book of Mormon can easily fit in even if it's the third of the plate stack. Book of Mormon, 116 pages, can easily fit in that number of plates. What you would expect in the sealed portion can fit too. So
Right. So you've tested that the thinness of the plates, that there could be somewhere ranging between 300 to 600, including the seal portion, that could fit within the 6-inch height dimensions given per se,
yeah,
that you could engrave on both sides as well, and that
yeah. And
the text of the Book of Mormon could fit it being a logographic script.
yeah, and the one I showed you was 0.0675. So okay, 500 plates. I mean, if you're using that I just showed you, where I can engrave easily on it. I can tell you, I could probably even, there's like no, I could even press hard. I couldn't get, I'm just saying there was no reason to go very hard at all. It's just like writing with a pen.
And if
Much.
somebody were to argue, like, they were able to make that, today that thin because of our technology, how on earth were people from the Middle East or from Mesoamerica able to make metal sheets that thin? What would you say?
Neil covered with that. They've found examples plenty thin of that.
Some of the mine artifacts as well. Some of the Tumbago were very thin as well.
Yeah, the Moche, that culture I showed you they were very, and like I said, so yes, you have plates that thin. You can work at that thin. You just like I showed you, the Tumbaga on that one, it was about 10 microns, or the gold. Again, it's not 100% gold all the way down, so maybe it's a little bit harder, but they could have, if you wanted to, you could work it more and get more gold percentage in that upper layer of gold. They weren't principally interested in engraving, right? They were principally interested in just getting a gold surface that looked royal and didn't corrode. So they did what they needed to do for the purpose of that. But if you're trying to get a little higher concentration of gold because it makes it easier to engrave on your copper plate, they could do that too.
Okay. Are you able to unshare your screen? Because if your slides are done, we could get us on full screen again.
There we go.
Perfect.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm just saying that I think I've demonstrated it. Now, I mean, can people criticize it? Fine, but I mean, criticize it based on the science, not on your preconceptions, right?
Right. Preconceived beliefs.
Yeah, and like I say, they're like, if they want to argue an eighth of an inch, then okay, create an eighth of an inch. If they think it's fake, well, create an eighth of an inch tin plate that you can, a stack of them that you can bend like parchment. I don't care. Go ahead and try it.
Yeah.
You're just going to cut your finger. That,
So. Yeah, it wouldn't work with those descriptions of it being thin like parchment and pliable like paper if it was an eighth of an inch thick and if the set just consisted of 36 plates. Now, I want to ask a couple of just wrapping up questions. I think we've covered a lot and we've gone probably just over 2 hours. There's an episode made a few years ago on Mormon Stories. I think I only watched it once. I've not thought about it a whole lot since. But it's some person saying that he created a set of plates using 19th century tools. I was kind of making the argument that this really wouldn't be that difficult to make. And you got Dan Vogel's theory that when Joseph was going to the Hill Cumorah, that's when he, was collecting tin and he manufactured his own set of plates. Obviously, we're both believers, and you're sort of presenting that it's plausible that technology and making an artifact like this in the ancient world. What do you think about the plausibility of Joseph, who I think he would have been 21 when he got the plate? So if he manufactured the plates, he would have been 21, having the skills to have created a set of plates like this with etching engravings on, as the witnesses described. Like, do you believe that Joseph would have had the capabilities to have done that?
Are we talking idiot Joseph or genius Joseph?
Oh, well, let's just say genius.
Because there's different versions of
metallurgy as well. Farm boy, but skilled in metallurgy a little bit on the side as well.
I mean, it just depends on which. I mean, Joseph Smith's, this idiot, and he's this genius. I was like, I have no clue what Joseph Smith could or couldn't do. I mean, honestly, in terms of, I don't know. I don't study that. It's pretty clear that could somebody at that time have gotten a bunch of plates and made a stack? Well, I suppose if they knew how to cut metal and had a pan break, and could they have tried to scratch something on it? Maybe they could. Like I say, can you try to do it and have it be pliable? Good luck. You're going to have to be pretty thin.
And what if somebody said that, like, oh, well, James Strang made the Vori plates and then there's Kinderhook plates brought, so Joseph just making his own set of plates, even with engravings on, isn't that impressive? Or this doesn't mean, it had to be done by ancient authors and delivered by an angel. Like, it's, if other people
all I know is
Manufactured plates in the 19th century, Joseph could have done it.
unless you subscribe to that, they're all in some sort of weird hypnotic trance and they all saw the same thing and all the witnesses, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I guess you can make whatever ridiculous arguments you want. Well, they had to be good enough. Everybody agrees there was probably plates, right? I mean, there's just enough
Right.
evidence that they were plates. So it's like, okay, then you got to do them good enough. They'd fool somebody and to think they're of ancient make. They got to be gold, right? They got to be green. They got to have some corrosion already happened on them to be green. You're gonna have to paint them gold and individually paint black in every freaking engraving, the whole thing. It was they flipped through them, because the engravings were black. I'm just saying, could
Oh,
somebody
that's
have
right.
made
Yeah.
that? I
I remember Neil
suppose.
talked about that in our last episode as well.
Yeah, and I talk about that in great detail in my book, where I actually go through and show how that could have happened. And a lot of the stuff he was showing was out of my book.
I need to read
know,
that book then.
yeah, it's on there. I mean, I wrote it back 2015 or whatever. It's been out for a long time, but
Yeah.
and probably needs an update. But that's some of the stuff I'm telling you would be updates to it.
Okay.
But again, it's like, okay, guess go do it. Then you show me how you do it. And again, they just make statements, blah, 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 blah. I've actually gone through, I've done it. I've kind of showed you exactly what meets all the parameters, everything. So more power to you. But I guess you could, again, it kind of boils down to it always boils down to this. If you do not believe in God or in intervention or supernatural intervention, I don't care whether you're talking about Jesus Christ or the plates or whatever, you're always going to you got to look for some alternative explanation. And so even if you come with an alternative explanation, doesn't necessarily discount whether the supernatural one is or not. It's just like me. I mean, okay, I've looked at the third Nephi. Yeah, volcanic eruption, all this. I've explained it naturally, but that doesn't mean there wasn't God involved. That doesn't mean it's not a religious text. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like you can look at things scientifically. So as far as the plates, well, if you think you can make a set of plates that match all the descriptions given, or at least most of them, like I said, there may be some outliers, like some people, some in some newspaper, somebody recounting something. It's just like all history. There's never like 100% agreement on anything.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you see that, you want to get suspicious a little bit. It's like,
Yeah, I definitely find that whenever I did like my research and episodes on like Book of Mormon translation, there's consistency, but there's also a lot of inconsistency. It was quite complex. It's not all unified.
Yeah,
what people are claiming.
and the translation, it's over time. He may have been doing something a little different at certain points in time.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. Yeah, so you have all that too. They're all like trying to cram it all in one neat thing. So I'm just saying on the plates, I've shown you exactly, and I'm not just taking it out of the air. I'm saying these are the descriptions. Here's what I've done. I've measured it. I've done these things. If you just want to discount it by calling me names, or I see some of these guys just say stuff and laugh and blah blah blah.
Well,
It's
that's
like,
not very kind.
it's because they're pretending. I don't care. They're performing to their audience of people that don't like the plays or like Joseph Smith's. I don't really care. It's just like, but that's not research.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying I presented research. I published it. I'll be publishing this too. What I've shown you again, and somewhere you can review. You can see all the sources. You can see where I determined what the hardness should be based on ancient metallurgy, right? And so again, you don't have to believe in the gold plates or the Book of Mormon or anything. I'm just telling you, this was a description given. These are the techniques that look to have been used. They all make sense. This is the thickness of the plates. I like I said, I'm not. The premise. I guess that's why I'm different than an apologist, and what you call an apologist. Some people that are apologists try to defend stuff and just try to pick things that give them the best defense. I'm not saying that's totally invalid. I mean, yes, there are some research. I don't approach it like that. I say, here's a question. What was the thickness of the plates? Again, the presumption is that they actually existed and they are an ancient text of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
So I do the research and say, okay, here's what I'm finding. I'm not like, oh, I've got to find this thickness so I can make sure that the whole Book of Mormon fits on the plates. I could care less. Like I say, I'm looking at it because people ask me to look at it. but I don't really care about it. And that's why you say, because I did the characters translation. People may not like that or believe it, but that's my research, and I think it's defendable. And that's so I kind of know what I already know what the word density is. So why would I go through all these weird gyrations with the plates of Darius and the amulets? I don't need to do that. If you want to do that, fine, but just make sure I'm just saying, follow the right parameters if you're going to do that. If you don't like the characters document, my translation, great, but at least use that as the premise for the number of glyphs, and make sure you know that it's a logographic text that you're talking about.
Mm.
And if you want to use, then go find examples of that anciently and see what your word count is. The number of plates I've calculated. I've showed you actually the thickness. I've made plates so you could that match that pretty close, and you can easily engrave on them. Right. So
Right. And
there
I
you go.
appreciate you doing this work and this level of research, because I think why it's important, although you said your intent isn't to be an apologist or to defend or answer the critics, it can be helpful for those people. Like, for example, whenever I first came across, for example, that criticism by the LDS discussion guy over 2 years ago, wasn't aware of your work or Neil at that time. This was a new criticism brought up to me at the time, and it didn't. I wouldn't say it completely shook my faith, but for some people, that they might have felt like, oh my gosh, it's absurd. There's no way. It's been debunked, and it's almost like they don't have access to any answers that might either undermine or heavily challenge or show that actually what they're attesting is likely not incorrect. And that's why I think it's important, because then as I look back and read through what he said, you realize that all the assumptions they're making and how he's not done the work and the testing that you've done into it as well. And it sort of it makes that criticism
they
significant.
selectively. I have a hard time believing they were unaware of my work. You just
I,
Google gold plates, Zip, anything. My name comes up, and there's a free book you can just look at. So I'm saying it's not like you have to buy my book. It's all on the internet, all available, all for free. I'm saying you didn't know, but if they are serious researchers
mhm.
that are really caring not to just match whatever their preconceived notion is and selecting those things that they think are work best for them, then of course that's not research, right?
Mhm.
That's dishonest, to be honest. Meaning that, so it's like, I get it. Some people are kind of lazy and maybe don't really read books, and just kind of put stuff out. But it's clear when you see people doing that, I wouldn't believe them, right? They're not
Yeah, shows you
they're
didn't
not
do
being
your
honest
homework.
in their approach, right? And they're not producing reviewable academic grade material. And I don't care if it's peer reviewed. I mean, it's hard. I mean, I could care less. I mean, peer review is fine, but the reality is, most science, if it's reproducible and it's scientific and it's data and you have sources, I'm not that concerned if it's peer reviewed per se. I just care that you actually have documented your sources and people can look it up and that your reasoning is sound, right? Peer review is something that is done for papers, and it's mostly that the journals decide what they want. And sometimes it quality controls, but I've seen some pretty crappy papers get through peer review that were, wrong.
Mm.
So, but I don't care, because I always look at the original sources. I don't take any paper. I don't take anything just on its face value. I go look up the sources, just like you've done with your witnesses and all that. And yeah, it takes some time, but
Yeah, that's true.
that is a problem that kind of in our culture, they just see a podcast and, oh my God, blah blah blah. They believe it. And I ran for politics for 12 years, and people would ask me what the truth is. I go, well, just read my website, right? My campaign material, it's all true.
Yeah, that's the best. Like the
I'm
best
just saying,
way is,
and people just laugh, because of course no one's going to believe that. I'm
yeah,
saying,
of course.
yeah. So
It's sort of the
why are you
best way.
believing all this other stuff?
It's hard in certain topics because there's no way that you could become an expert in, like, I don't know, Egyptology or
Yeah.
archaeology or science. But there's certain things, like, for example, like I feel like I've read through nearly all of the statements of the witnesses I could get a hold of, like things like the statements of the witnesses of the translation, and then you can just read through them all yourself and piece it together. And I think it's important to differentiate between like the data and all the sources, and then like people's interpretations as well. And sometimes critics can sometimes be guilty of declaring that something's a fact when it's actually they're just taking certain things that support that. And I'm sure believers do that as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to clarify the difference.
And I think that's kind of what I'm saying is I don't care. It's just like they need to have some body of work that is published or available that is of a level I call academic grade.
Yeah, keeping them accountable as well for their.
Well, I'm just saying, so people talk on podcasts, great. Well, let me see what your work is. Then I can actually review and see whether it's correct or not. I can look at your sources. It's just not you talking, right? So
but it takes time to do that. Because, for example, I'll give one example. I was doing an episode on the priesthood restoration, and I remember Grant Palmer, his book, Insider's View of Mormon Origins. I won't go too much in depth in this, but there was an argument he made that Joseph and Oliver evolved their story that they received the priesthood by the Spirit in 1829. Then by 1832, it was reception by angels. And then by 1834-35, named apostles. And at the time, I was like, good argument. I don't have a response to it. So then whenever I did my video, I was like, I really want to look into this closely. And critics are right. Angels aren't referred to until 1832. But whenever I looked at his 1829 source that he used to support them receiving it by the Spirit, it wasn't from 1829. It was from 1839. But obviously, they're referring back to what happened in 1829. I was like, okay, that was misleading. Whenever I looked at the full quote in context from the Joseph Smith Papers Project, it talked about John the Baptist beforehand. So I was like, wait a minute. He's referring to the angel beforehand. And actually, what he was quoting was when they're referring to receiving like the authority for the Melchizedek priesthood in the chamber of the Father Whitmer home as well, when they ordained each other the office of elder. And anyway, for me, it was like, I would never have known that that was misleading had I have not fact checked it. But that took time. And like,
I know
it's hard to take the time to fact check every single thing as well. But
it is.
That was kind of misleading.
And that's why I'm saying, I mean, I'm think it's not that you have to know everything, but I was saying, before I even give anybody credence on a podcast or something, I want to make sure there's some underlying work, right? That's backing it up. Now, and then I can maybe rely on other people that have reviewed that work or historians that look at it. I mean, I'm not saying you have to become the jack of all trades, right? And everything, but there needs to be at least somebody produce something that can be looked at and reviewed by somebody. And then you may rely on, then you can see the different points of view. You don't necessarily have to be a historian, but you can say, oh, this historian looks at it this way. This other one looks at it this way. You found out your own thing. That's always interesting to go look yourself. Right. And that's all I'm saying is like, I have this book out. It's available. People, they're not even, are they ignoring it on purpose? I mean, it would come up in any Google search. That's all I'm saying. So why haven't you engaged with the work? If you're gonna get into this area of talking about Book of Mormon metallurgy and plates and all that kind of stuff, you better be familiar with all the work. And I'm saying I looked at I was pretty thorough. I didn't care what the source was, in terms of description. And so I don't know. That's kind of my take. And in the end, I mean, it's just like anything else in life. It's honestly, because I'm Christian, I believe in Jesus Christ. He did say, the Spirit, it's like wind through the trees, meaning in the end, if you are not able to discern the Spirit, that's what it's all about, right? I mean, you're never going to get to full truth. That's what your basis of your belief in Jesus. It's not because, I found this tomb and all that. It's like, no, I believe I feel the Spirit. And there's many ways you can, I'm not even saying which way, it could be enlightened. However you find truth, I mean, spiritual truth is what I'm saying. Then, and if you believe in no spiritual truth and blah, 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 and you're atheist, okay, whatever you want to do. But those that are so inclined to have, that I think is true, then in the end, that's what I go off of, right? I mean, I'm not, it's not, my research isn't like driven by, I mean, I do separate that. So I do have a sense of, yes, this is true because I've had a witness of it. I do know that there is beyond this grave. I do know there are spiritual elements. I do know there is a God, not because of my research on 10 microns of gold on a copper plate. Do you know what I'm saying? Meaning,
Yeah, no,
so
yeah, that
it
doesn't settle. That
transcends
doesn't
all that.
settle.
And at the end of my life, that's really, as I go to the next, that's what's carrying me through. That's what my knowledge comes from. That's where my peace comes from in life. That's what my spiritual, journey is all about.
That's the
All these other
foundation for
things.
your faith, the primary
Yeah. So
foundation.
all these other things are interesting just because I find them fascinating, right?
Mm.
Even the characters document. I got so much criticism. Do you have the interpreters? Are you a prophet? I'm like, no, I just wrote a book. It's not. I'm not trying to be anything. I'm not trying to do anything. I'm not trying to. It's just my. But so my religion is not necessarily based on all this stuff. These are all ancillary and interesting, and sometimes I can gain some interesting understanding. But it's do I do I follow? Do I believe that there is a God? Do I believe that God can talk to me in some fashion and through the Spirit? And am I going to follow it or not? That's the primary question, right? And so for me, all these things are interesting, but the key is if you, any individual, and I don't care whether they are LDS or whatever they are, if they can follow light of Christ, if they can sense truth, if they can sense God and follow the right, that's the key. I mean, that's the main point we're here, to be honest with you, is to see who's going to be inclined to follow that way.
Yeah.
And also choose good, because if you're inclined to follow that way and it's the right spirit you're following, then you'll do good thing. You'll understand more truth. You'll gain in knowledge, all these things. And so that to me is the underlying premise of my life, is not, is the Mesoamerican model true? I mean, that's great. And it provides understanding and I like it, but and I don't like people that purvey untruth, on things that I know are true. But in the end, and I don't know that I have all truth. Through my life, I went and studied with the Buddhist monks in China. I've studied with Hare Krishnas.
Oh, wow.
I interned inside the Vatican, in the Secretariat for Christian Unity when I was younger. So I don't think, the LDS has some like patent on the truth, right? I mean, it's a source.
Mhm.
It provides a guide for you of how, and another witness of Christ, which I believed in Christ just reading the New Testament, right? I mean, I didn't, Book of Mormon is great too, but I just heard the teachings. They were powerful, right? They were from, obviously, then he said he's, you know, the Son of God. Well, I believed it, right? I had a feeling that, yeah, understanding. And people can criticize it and say it's an emotion and all this stuff, but I differentiate between that. I'm not
Mm.
an emotional guy, so I don't really, that's not something. And like I've often said, people said, so am I going to feel a burning in my bosom when I read your books? I've usually just said, no, you just get a burning of your eyes.
Maybe in your head as well.
Yeah, it's like
Burning pain.
that's not my motivation, right? If you're looking at my books for like, I'm speaking for God, I'm not.
Mm.
If you find something interesting in them, great. But I'm just saying you have to approach God in your own way. If you
Yeah.
don't believe in God, fine. You approach whatever you think is, if it's some higher level of knowledge, I don't know. But I'm saying that's the challenge of every human being. Not everyone. I mean, some have disabilities, things they aren't able to function very well. But that's the key is as you approach is in the end of your life, or do you have you tried to understand truth the best you can, try to follow spiritual God the best you can, and learn to love other people, all these things. Those are the critical elements. I'm not going to be given a
Yeah.
quiz on the characters document when I get to the other side,
Yeah, your entrance into back into God's presence is going to be dependent on having a correct theory of translation or geography model for the Book of Mormon.
That's right. And
They're really
and like I
secondary.
yeah, and people that aren't LDS or whatever, they'll have to face God and I guess you have to answer for what truth that you knew. It's what spirit you knew, what you knew right or wrong to be, and how you conformed your life to it or not to it.
Mm.
And all these other things like Book of Mormon, all these things given to us are to help us to better understand that, to approach God. And honestly, could I understand everything in the Book of Mormon if the Spirit just told it to me? Well, I suppose I could, but it gives me somewhere to go to ponder and think of principles and grow. So I don't know. I mean, that to me is the way I've approached my life, and hasn't all been perfect. I've had a lot of setbacks and difficulties and things like that, but it's helped me get through them. Book of Mormon was very helpful to me. I went through some, difficult times. I would just kind of bury myself in there because I could kind of tune out all the bad things that were happening around me. And it was a place of light for me, and interesting to me. So, but it was the Spirit ultimately. It wasn't the Book of Mormon itself, the words. It was the understanding I got from it. So that's why I'm saying I'm not really an apologetic in that sense, in the sense that I'm out to defend the church. I just find these things fascinating. It's kind of like I say, I wish I had the plates, not because it would prove anything, just because I find them interesting.
Yeah. Just to study and
I wouldn't like, oh, now I know it's true. It's like, no, I kind of want to see them, to see what other glyphs are on there. So I mean, I don't have this like, I'm not trying to prove anything in a weird way. People say I'm not really not. It's just like, you can believe what you want to believe. I'm just showing you what it says and what I've kind of found, and if you like it, like it. If not, my books are all free. Just delete them. So
I appreciate that. I appreciate especially you sharing your spiritual testimony as well, because I think that's important. That ultimately is sort of, or probably should be, the foundation for your faith. That's kind of what the book's all about, is that connection with God and Christ, and that spiritual witness. I think God wants us to use both our heart and our mind. I think that might be why sometimes evidence is there, or might help if you're having intellectual struggle. I think there's a necessity for some of this research and apologetics and scholarship, but it shouldn't be the basis for your belief in the Book of Mormon if it's just purely intellectual and academic. I think they go together.
yeah, like I say, I mean, you had mentioned it. Some people do have times where they, kind of distance themselves a little bit from the church. And I haven't really distanced, but I've had other challenges that caused me not to be too engaged. But it wasn't like doctrinal crisis. It wasn't Book of Mormon crisis. It was just like um, personal situation problems, right? So I think everybody goes through their own thing. So I'm just saying, but I still rely on the Spirit and other things to help me during those times. And yes, it's helpful. I mean, I had a friend that comes over and helps you out, right? It could be, I'm just saying, some people look to these kind of research when they have a doubt. If it helps them out, great. I'm just saying, but I don't, I'm not, I guess the expectation is that I'm out there trying to prove and show and this and that. And I'm pretty, if people challenge my research, I aggressively defend it, not because it's an ego thing. It's just because I did do a lot of research. And if they point out something that's wrong, great. I'm willing to fix it.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm like wedded to it. And science is always that way. That's why people always say, oh, you're just changing the goalposts. I mean, science doesn't have goalposts. It's not a game of football. It's a progression of knowledge. I would look at it, it's like, well, no, in football they do change things. They actually did change the goalposts. The goalposts used to be at the front, and everybody kept running into them, right? So then they put them at the back of the end zone because people get hurt.
Changing the goalposts, you Americans. Football was always just you kick the ball, and you have it kind of like rugby, so you completely changed the game, let alone the goalposts.
Yeah, we improved it, but
oh wow.
No, but again, that's what I'm saying. Even people that use these things, they don't even understand what they're talking about, right? And so there's always room for new knowledge, new understanding, and so I don't, and it's even like, looking at the Book of Mormon geography and things. I just like it because it's interesting. I do think it sometimes adds to my understanding of what Mormon was maybe going through, what his culture, what was around him, So what I'm saying is,
enrich the text as well.
Yeah, but it's not like the basis of of my belief that Jesus Christ is the Son of God,
Yeah.
and so, just like powerful stories to me when I was younger was just like the blind man being healed. That to me was just, I don't know, that hit me with a lot of power. And he goes, is he God or is he the Lord or not? He goes, I don't know. All I know is that I couldn't see and now I can't, meaning he wasn't a very sophisticated, that beliefs, his conversion wasn't all this doctrinal,
Nothing
reading
intellectual about it.
Isaiah. He just witnessed this miracle, and so that his belief followed, right? And so I'm just saying, I don't necessarily look to these sophisticated or even my science or all of this. For me, it's really this core of, of love and caring and those kinds of things to me are more important than because I do other things besides my research. I sponsor like a farm in Africa, where I try to do charitable work, and I don't really broadcast it really, but to me, that's more important than any of the research I'm doing, to be honest with you. So,
Definitely.
yeah. So I'm just saying that's kind of my approach, and I'm kind of this outlier, I guess I would say, meaning I'm not attached to any organization. I just do research I like,
Yeah. Well,
and
I really appreciate the research and the work you've done. I hope that we can keep collaborating. I'll put in the description your book for people to check out. I'll also link my episode with Neil Rapley as well. And I think it was important the things that we covered and addressed today. And people should go check out, your books and your work. And if people can respond to it or challenge it, they should. But they should really try to address, what's in your books as well. And I think this is an example to all of us that we should try to fact check things and try to go to experts as well, not always take everything at face value as well.
yeah,
There's a lot more complexity to a lot of subjects.
Yeah, my website's bmslr.org. I also have a whole page. Now I have John Sorensen, all his work up for free to download, except for Mormon's Codex. I don't have that. But Deseret
I don't
Book.
want to read that one, but it's quite expensive.
Yeah, but I have the Ancient America setting, which people
Yeah.
reference. I got permission from Deseret Book license. So that's all. You can download that for free. So that's his first book, so I'm all for just getting information out for free to people. I think that's part of the problem is sometimes these books cost money and people can't get them and it's not available. So I'm actually willing to pay money to get buyout rights or something to get something important up for free. Doesn't mean people will read a long book, but at least
I think it's good having these long form sort of podcasts where some of those things that people aren't going to read the book, they can have it can be somewhat accessible and summarized in, podcast interviews like this.
Yeah, like I said, I have no problem with podcasts, but I do understand there's a certain element to them. There's some entertainment value, right? That people play into a lot of the podcasts, and you're trying to get something of interest and get followers and clicks and all that. I'm just saying, if you see like what you call more research being presented on a podcast without any underlying documents, I would say, well, okay, I'm always going to take that with a grain of salt. Please produce something I can review in detail and look up sources on rather than just you talking about it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why when I'm talking about this fellow, I'm sure he's a great guy, this Catholic apologist, but he obviously didn't do very good homework on what he was doing.
Yeah. And I guess one last thought I have, and you kind of touched on this, and I hate to sort of go back to sort of like an intellectual argument as we've been talking about spiritual stuff, but I feel like the plates are just kind of like an obstacle. There's something that like you're confronted with and you can't just ignore or dismiss them. And like as you said, like I struggle, not that I view them as proof or anything, but I struggle to believe Joseph could have manufactured plates like that himself, in his environment. I'm not going to say impossible. I personally find it quite improbable. I even have an unbelieving family member who finds it improbable, and she just thinks, well, the plates didn't exist. And I was like, well, there's so many sources, so many witnesses beyond the 3 and the 8 that there had to be some sort of plate artifact. Even critics, sophisticated critics, would argue that. And what I found kind of interesting whenever I responded to the Mormon Stories episode they did in the 8 Witnesses is they're reading actually some first-hand, second-hand statements from the witnesses, and it was kind of funny. I remember John bringing up like, but what about all those witnesses who said like they saw the plates and saw the engravings, and in their conclusion, Mike and another co-host was saying that it was probably more just like spiritual seeing, through the cloth, like they just, they didn't take seriously a lot of their first or second hand statements, even though that's what they claim collectively. As you look at them, they're claiming to have seen to handle the plates naturally. That's my view. And I remember John saying that, like, oh, well, I don't believe Joseph could have manufactured plates that they're describing, with the appearance of gold with engravings on it. So it must have just been covered in a cloth. And I just find that, like, what? Like, that's just problematic. But I understand, like, it's quite hard to believe that Joseph could have created plates like that at age 21, a farm boy in his environment that would have passed visual inspection, like, as described as well.
Yeah,
But
and I think
they're a bit of an obstacle. And then with the three witnesses, then inducing mass hypnosis or mass hallucination, which they reaffirm to the day they die. Like, not only Joseph being religious genius in dictating the Book of Mormon, but also creating the plates and the witnesses. Like, they're
again,
hard to explain away. And I guess I think
and
where critics tend to go,
if you want to believe that, like massive, no, go ahead and believe that. I don't care. I mean, if that makes you feel better about your non-belief, go ahead. I mean, I'm just saying it doesn't. They can always find people can find all the kind of explanations they want, but again, I'm like, again, that's where it boils down to. You don't have any belief in the place. You don't believe in spirit and supernatural. You just believe in what you want to believe, and so you create all these, yes, and some of them just sound outlandish, right? But they believe it.
mm.
So
And what
people
would
do
you
that all
say?
the time.
Or like a final question, like if somebody were to say, well, we believe the Book of Mormon's not historical, there's no definitive archaeological evidence, there's anachronisms, there's 19th century influences or language in the text. So even if the witnesses claim what they claimed, even if what you're showing about the plates, this still doesn't mean it's ancient, and that this is a better explanation that it was just a modern document, had to be modern plates, and there couldn't have been an angel that came. And that, as improbable as that might sound, Joseph making his own set of plates and the witnesses having their experience, that's more likely than there being a historical Book of Mormon that he translated that witnesses claim to see.
Well, of course, you listed a lot of things. Each of would take a lot of discussion and acronyms.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So right. So, but the general thing is, I guess, again, you start from this premise. Do you believe it's possible that there's a God, that you can have supernatural or spiritual things? If you start from that premise that you don't, then you're not going to believe anything that's presented. You'll figure out some way to create to reinforce your belief system. Now, some people could say the same thing of people that are believers, that they just create stuff. But
Sure.
and so that's what the point is that's why you have an individual belief, and the spiritual core, the spiritual tie what's really key. I would just say, you know, again, my research is I've showed you the exact matching all the descriptions, not assuming hallucinations, not assuming anything as to the method of the construction of the plates, that they are consistent with the description. In my books, I show you that the technologies were available anciently, both in the old world and the new world. Yeah, there's some like, would it be nice to find some more metal in Mesoamerica? Yeah, but it's probably available as a trade item. I mean, there's explanations. So that's what I've done. Is that going to cause you to all of a sudden believe this whole story of Joseph Smith? No, you're gonna have to read the Book of Mormon and find out for yourself and inquire of God, like we always say. And if you choose not to do that, or you do it and don't, I mean, but that goes to what we really, at least my belief system, you're going to have to wrestle that out with God, or not wrestle it. You can just ignore it and not believe in God. And it doesn't mean you're a horrible person. I'm not saying anything like that, but that's the core. And so all I've done is just take the description that was given, show you how the plates, and even like the covering of the plates, if you understand I've talked about this in another podcast, is in Mesoamerica, they had sacred bundles. So they wrapped all their sacred relics were inside of cloth. They always had to keep them covered. And so the fact that the plates were covered is actually consistent with their ancient source, right? That's why Moroni instructed them to do it right at the beginning, to take the cloth and put it in immediately. It wasn't to the end. The breastplate was wrapped in cloth. So
kind of like the Nephi Ark.
It was. Those are sacred relics, right? Sacred relics. It had weapon. It had the sword of Laban. It had these things. Just like. So what I'm saying is yeah, you can make all these things, but if you understand where it comes from, that all makes sense. If you don't come from that understanding and are just trying to find things, I guess you can. And I think that's the history of what you call anti-Mormon is. You go from one thing to another thing to another thing. That one thing falls apart. So then they go to first you had no plates, and it's like, well, I guess there was plates, I mean, so it's this series of like throwing things out, making, assertions is not true. And some of them at the time, that was what the science indicated or whatever they knew. But over time, a lot of these things have gone away, right? And so I think the key is you have to, your faith can be reinforced by the things that I present, or you can discount it or whatever. But the plates themselves, I think we're kind of to the point where, hey, we can explain exactly how they were made anciently. So if you think you can explain how they weren't, great, go ahead and do it. Try to find some plates that you can flip through that Joseph Smith would have had access to. Maybe you can do it, but that's not my job. I mean, I'm just saying I have faith in this belief. I've looked at what was given, and I provided an explanation for it. That's all I do. I look at the Book of Mormon, I provide an explanation for it. Give me the characters document. Okay, you can believe it, but I provided an explanation for it. I provided a translation. I'm given a book on chronology that shows you the exact chronology. I show you an underlying number pattern through the whole Book of Mormon that consists of the sacred numbers of Mesoamerican Hebrew in their year counts. It's there. I don't care what people say. So you can just ignore it or what, but is it proof? Yeah, but it's not why I found out about it. I just found out because it was interesting and I looked at it. So I'm just saying all my work is, yes, it's supportive of the Book of Mormon. But I still say it's never going to be enough. People can always find reasons not to believe. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, Jerry, I think this has been great. Long discussion, 3 hours. I have to consider whether to keep it as one long episode or 2 parts. I think I might just keep it as one long episode.
Well, and you can cut off parts, things where I was rambling through. I mean, feel free to edit. I mean,
but thanks so much for coming on and doing this episode, and we'll have to collaborate again on future topics. And listeners who are still watching, if you enjoy this, give it a like, comment, and check out his books. Don't forget to subscribe as well to my channel. And if you'd like to donate, there's options to donate as well, Patreon or PayPal as well. And we'll see you next time on Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye.
Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.